This is Talking Law with Despina Priala from Priala Legal, and if you have a question, any question at all about the law, what you need to do is drop it in an email. It's breakfast97@superradionetwork.com.au. So it's a brand new email, breakfast97@superradionetwork.com.au.
All right, next hot topic is about de facto relationships. So people can say, oh, I have a boyfriend, I have a girlfriend, but legally, is that the case in terms of, what if you split up? What if something goes wrong? Despina, shed some light for us.
Okay, well, I will do my best.
All right.
So I say that up front because I'm not a family lawyer, but having many years' experience as a solicitor, I have come across quite a few interesting cases. I've read cases, and just my general experience as a practitioner, I can comment and provide some general advice and information to those listeners. And it's probably maybe timely, if I can say that, because of COVID and what we've been through in the last year, and we're continuing to go through it. There have been a lot of relationship issues, people separating. It's been a very stressful time, and people have had to go through the courts. The courts are closed sometimes, and they're not, and hearings are heard remotely, and a lot of it has been to do with relationships and people separating.
And I think at this time we find out just how strong our relationships are.
Being locked in a house for
24
months on
hours
end.
a day, yes.
Exactly. So let's talk about some of the things that the court looks at. And remember, when we talk about de facto relationship, there isn't just one definition that says this is a de facto relationship, because there are many factors that the family court will take into account to determine whether a couple, two people, are in a de facto relationship, and each case will be determined on its own merits. So it's really important to say that up front. So what might apply, say, to one couple might not necessarily apply to another couple. And that's why the court will always look at each individual case as they come through on their merits. But we can talk about some of the factors that the court will look at. And I know that from reading cases over the years and understanding that. So the first thing is, of course, the duration. Now that's obvious, isn't it? So how long have you been together? All right. 4 months, 3 months, 2 years, 5 years, it makes a difference. Okay, so the duration of the relationship, how long you've been together, is important.
Is there a starting point? So, is 2 weeks too short? Is 3 months too short? Is 6 months too short? Is there a definitive starting point? As in, yes, we are now living together because we've been cohabitating for a month or 2 months.
I think that I don't think I've ever seen a de facto relationship classed within 2 weeks.
Okay,
that would be a first, but it depends on the other factors involved. So say if you were together for 6 months or a year or 2 years, and generally we look at minimum 6 months, but not necessarily. It depends on the other factors I'm going to talk about. Okay, and whether you have all of them or an abundance of them, or whether you only have one or two of these factors that the court takes into account. So let's look at the others, and it might, people might be able to understand it a bit better. So the duration of the relationship we talked about, the nature and extent of having a common residence. Now, you might think, well, isn't that obvious? People live together? Not necessarily.
Not at all.
No, you could have your own residence. So, the man, I will talk about a man and woman just to make it easier, I suppose, rather than talking about different types of relationships. But, a man over here could have one residence at home and he lives there, and then the woman could have her own home and own it outright, right? On the other hand. So you could have a joint residence. So that makes a difference. So if you each have your own residence, your own home, then does that mean how many days do you spend in one home, how many nights per week, and then how many nights do you spend in the other home, and how many nights do you spend apart?
Yeah.
So that is really relevant to determining whether you are truly in a de facto relationship. So it is a very important factor to take into account. Whether a sexual relationship exists. So you don't assume always that there is a sexual relationship. So that is a factor that gets taken into account.
Wow. As in, this might be a bit weird, but as in how often?
It does say whether it exists.
Okay.
So
I only do it once a month. No, sorry, you're not in a de facto relationship.
As I said, each case will be determined on its merits and individual factors and circumstances. So maybe that will be relevant, maybe not. Maybe a couple were having a sexual relationship and then ceased but then had other factors that still remain the same.
Yeah.
You know, like having joint assets still and living under the one roof. So, yeah, as I said, all of these factors get taken into account. So another factor is the degree of financial dependence or interdependence. So how well does one party support the other financially? Or how do they support each other together financially? That's really important. Okay, and of course, you know, examples of that would be joint bank accounts, or maybe you have a primary credit card holder and then the other person is a secondary credit card holder, and there's a financial support there because one's paying for the other. So it's really important factor. Another factor, ownership, use, and acquisition of property. And that's a big one. So do you own your assets together, jointly, or do you have separate assets? Now, a lot of couples, and this particularly, in particular these days, I'm seeing that couples are retaining ownership of their own assets. Interestingly enough,
While they're actually cohabitating.
yes, or while they're starting to have a relationship, and they
relationship.
do have a relationship, and maybe it's a year or two down the track, but you know, they still have their individual assets, so they're not actually you know, joining everything together per se.
Own cars.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So maybe sometimes we find a couple will only have one joint bank account together in terms of joint assets, and then everything else is separate. Okay, so that is a factor to take into account.
Yeah.
Really important. So the degree of mutual commitment to a shared life. So you might think, oh, what does that mean? Okay, so maybe examples would be, do they have children? Do they not? Do they go on holidays together? How else do they show their true commitment to a shared life together? And you could think of all sorts of examples of that. But yes, children, I would have thought, would be one factor to take into account there. Whether the relationship has been registered under a prescribed law of a state or territory. Okay, so certain relationships, civil relationships, can be registered in certain states.
Really?
Which is different to a marriage.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Hang on. What?
Same sex relationships can
Yeah.
be registered.
So where do you go? How do you do that?
Well, that's
Why do you
another
do
topic. Yeah, maybe we can talk about that in another
I've never
week.
heard of such a thing.
Yes.
Interesting. So,
So-
you can go and get that on a legal document to say, yep, I'm in a relationship.
Yes, it's registered, so it's for formality, so it's recognised. So that means that the couple have taken that extra step, which to me would then mean that there's a mutual commitment, you see, to a
course.
shared life because you've registered your relationship. So it is an important factor to take into account. Because if you were married, you have your marriage certificate,
Yeah.
right? So it is an important commitment. So another example, care and support of any children. Okay, so that's important, particularly with blended families. So you might have two people coming together, they've already had previous relationships, they might have had children from other relationships where they have shared custody, all right? And then when it's the one person's turn to have the children in that week, well, how does that partner help in the care and support of that person's children? So that's an important factor as well, whether they're de facto or not. And the reputation and public aspect of the relationship. Now, that's an important one, and I've seen that in some examples and through the courts. So how do people perceive this couple? Do people generally perceive them to be a couple in a de facto relationship, or do they perceive them to be in a different type of relationship? And that's how they display themselves in public.
So if they hold hands.
Yes.
Yes.
Go on holidays together.
Yeah.
Are they
Yeah.
Facebook officials?
Facebooks. So that's actually a really good one, because if someone claims that they are in a relationship, and I've seen this, say the man's Facebook page is he might put himself out there as being single,
Or he has a Tinder account?
Yes.
not in a relationship.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why would you do that and display that to the
course.
public, to the
When
world
you-
at large, when you say, oh, well, she says over here you're in a de facto relationship? A little bit tricky, yeah? So lots of interesting things, and it is about the perception. So the court will take that into account, because it is the way that you carry yourself in society, and to everybody at large. We are in a de facto relationship or we're not. And that's an important factor. And just going back to that common residence, I did have a case a few years back, and these sorts of aspects do cross over to deceased estates as well, where people are trying to make claims as a de facto against their partner who has died. So it's a mixture of the two different areas. Well, we had an example where, unfortunately, the female failed in her claim. She was claiming that she was a de facto, but there we had She had her own residence. He had his own residence. So they stayed in his house a couple of nights a week and stayed in her house a couple of nights a week. And the other nights they were separated. And they had separated assets. So no joint bank accounts, no joint homes, no joint property. But he did support her financially, paid for schooling for her child, paid for holidays. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough in this particular case. So the common residence is a big deal, because if you have a mutual commitment to share a life together, why are you having separate residences? And that's the question that the court will ask. So that is a really relevant point. Yeah, so it will come up and it will be relevant. So something to think about. But I hope that's just given the listeners a bit of a glimpse into what the court will look at in determining whether a couple are in a de facto relationship.
And I think that's important because these days, there are different relationships and same-sex relationships, etc. But because the world is changing, and certainly has been changing even more so over the last 18 months, people are living in different arrangements. Living arrangements with each other and separately. So it makes sense that to be able to, you need a certain level of I guess, reasons to say that yes, you are in this type of relationship.
That's exactly why I've just listed 9 factors. So there's not just one determining factor. No. There can't be. And as we evolve as a society, this is why these factors may or may not be reassessed. But yes, that's why there are multiple factors. That makes sense.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, great advice there once again from Despina Priala, answering all your questions about the law. And if you want to hear any of our Talking Law segments again, you can go to YouTube and just search Priala Legal. And if people want to get in touch, Despina, where can they go?
So they can ring the office 55 291 294, or they can text my mobile 0400 141 269.
And you can also send your questions to us here at breakfast97@superradionetwork.com.au. Once again, thank you, Despina.
Thank you. See you next week.
Bye.